I've done videos on quite a few of the systems that we've installed, including some of the experimental stuff, but I haven't done a video so far about the whole system as a whole, how it all interacts. So that's what I'm doing today. Now, permaculture is usually touted as being alternative to agriculture, a way of producing food more sustainably. But really, permaculture design ethics can apply to just about anything, from business to any land use really. So housing, human habitat, across the board. Our system here is designed to integrate the business, the Croft land itself, our food production systems, our housing and future expansion, all within the same system. Because we've got 5 acres here, which is a lot more land than one family needs for food. At least the way it's done in permaculture. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, at the moment, we're in a situation where the wheat harvest hasn't been particularly good in the UK. It's estimated that prices are going to go up by about 40% this year. And we've all had a bit of a wake-up call with what's happened with COVID and the issues that then came about because of the lockdown, lack of food in the shops and so on. That also applied to agriculture in that, you've got animals in the feed, theoretically that's food, but if you can't get feed for those animals, it gives you the same problem. Our objective here, as well as being trying to create a truly regenerative system rather than just something that's sustainable, which is treading water effectively, what we're doing is trying to come up with systems that actually improve and increase the fertility of the land and the biodiversity of the land as much as possible using closed loop systems. So we'll have a look through them now. So here I'm at the top of the land. This is the very highest point of the Croft, and this is the mainstay of our business. We've got 3 of these. We're going to have a 4th eventually. They're camping pods, not glamping. They're fairly basic structures in that they haven't got hot tubs and microwaves and electrics and all the rest of it. The idea is that people can come here to get away from all of that, but they're very well constructed. But anyway, they're not just stuck at the top of the field out of the way, so we haven't got to deal with customers and all the rest of it. They are integral, actual part of the system and designed to be so. So the pods are located within a food forest, a permaculture food forest that is designed to be a closed loop system. So here we've got, let me show you. So you can see there's fruit trees behind me. In the centre of them there's an autumn olive, and that is a nitrogen fixing species that will share its nitrogen with the dwarf fruit trees around it. At the base of the fruit trees there's a load of comfrey. It's only in its first year yet, so we haven't done it yet, but next year we'll start dropping that. Will provide fertility for the fruit trees. But also there's people up here right now at 2 a.m. if someone gets up needing to go to the toilet, no one's going to walk all the way over to the toilet block over there just to take a pee, nor would I expect them to. They're going to nip out, water a tree. That, instead of it being a pollutant and something that could cause a problem, at that point becomes an asset. So having people up here, just the physical act of having people up here will provide fertility for the food forest. Now, behind me is the toilet block. It's got a commercial composting toilet system with a twin vault system underneath the toilet, so we can alternate that year to year, and we can harvest compost from the compost that's a year old, so it's completely inert and safe to use. Now, the same toilet has a very clever, very innovative urine separation system. None of your funnels or any of that. That separates that out and takes it away to a soak away. And under around that soak away, we're growing comfrey. The idea being that we can harvest that comfrey 2-3 times a year. We can remove that and we can use that over behind me. There we are, with the trees and so on surrounding the camping pods, and feed that directly. So we can extract fertility from here where it's too dense easily a couple of barrel loads a year, and feed the rest of the food forest system. Soil mycelium and all that associated biology will do a really good job of moving that around to a degree, and of course fertility flows downhill, same as water, so we haven't got to worry about that in the croft further downhill, but it's not going to go laterally across the slope that far, so it allows us a way of doing that. We can also use that comfrey and use it for animal feed, and we can use it for producing compost. The other side of this building is the shower. And currently, you can see that's running on gas, propane. It's not ideal. That's a fossil fuel. It's something I'd like to get away from. So in the longer term, we've got further downhill, we've got willow swales that are going to be very, very densely planted. They're still coming along and maturing. They're about 3 years, I'd say, away from really, really cranking. That should supply all the biomass that we need to run a rocket hot water system up here. That means at that point that the wood chips soak for the composting toilet, as well as the biomass, sticks and so on for running the rocket hot water system, will be grown by the compost that's provided by the human manure from the customers. So that becomes a closed loop system. So that means that we haven't got to worry about getting any of that through the post. We did have one issue where we were struggling to get good quality shredded hemp is what we used initially. We were struggling to get it through the post in the middle of the lockdown, and we needed some to be able to open for business. So it's just a way around that. We'll never have to worry about that in a couple of years, nor will we have to worry and struggle about gas or the cost of gas, because that's not going down, is it? All of that will be produced here on site and used in a very simple system that I can build and maintain myself. I don't have to worry about gas safety certificates or anything at all like that. I can just use basic plumbing skills to get that working. So you can see that by integrating the customer pods and their infrastructure, the toilet and so on that's necessary, you can see they're integrating that into the system properly instead of just tacking it on as a cash cow. It changes the nature of it. The outputs from it, that could be pollutants such as sewage and things like that on a conventional system, here actually become assets. There's nothing, other bits and pieces that still need adding. We're going to have worm farms up right next to the bin area, so the food scraps, paper, cardboard, most organic matter go straight into the worm bins, and again give us another source of fertility where we need it in the food forest at the top of the site. Other things, drinking cans, bottles. We're going to be doing a lot of construction using bottle bricks over the next few years. So that'll change eventually, but currently bottles stay right here on site for further processing. Cans similarly. We're going to have to do a couple of concrete walls. I try to minimise concrete use. I don't like it, but sometimes it is necessary. And we're going to do a substantial amount of cob building, which in areas that you want it for thermal mass is, okay, you want as much cob as possible. But in other areas we can use tin cans as just a packing material to create voids, so that we need to mix a lot less cob. So yeah, there's very little waste leaves the site, even from the customer stuff. Mostly it's plastic packaging, and that's something that's going to have to change eventually anyway, culture wide, because the issue with plastics currently is colossal. It's a major problem. So yeah, that is the mainstay of our business. There'll be other bits and bobs that I'll come to in a little bit, but that's the biggest part of it. And yeah, it's fantastic. Having customers at the top of the site actually becomes a major asset rather than a necessary evil. Interesting, the people that are here today, I think they're just out at the minute, but the customers we got on site today have actually seen some of our YouTube stuff, and that's a first, so that's quite cool. Right, we'll have a look at some of the systems. Another reason that we've got the pods and the custom area right at the top of the site, well, there's two. The first is the view. You can see behind me we've got a 360 degree panoramic view of the entire horizon, which means in the daytime the skies go on forever and the days are very, very long. But it also means that in winter, when we've got really dark skies, and this is a dark sky site, there's very, very little light pollution here. the stars go from horizon to horizon. It's amazing. The other benefit is there's a little bit of wind today, but it's usually a bit less than this. Being at the top of the site means that there's always a slight background breeze, so there's very little insect pressure. So when you're spending time up here, and I've spent a lot of time up here building stuff, as you can see, you generally don't get bothered by insects, whereas you might further down where it's more sheltered. As well as that, we've got 3 pods, soon to be a 4th. We've got the toilet building, and soon there's going to be a cook shelter as well. All those buildings have 100% runoff. That generates a lot of water. All of that water currently goes into the top swale and also feeds the very biggest water containment system that we've got. Let's go and show you that. So behind me is the most recent pond that I've dug. I did a video on that recently. I'll put a link to that down in the description and all that. But yeah, it's the biggest pond that we've got. Now currently we've had 1 reasonable rain event in the last month. There really hasn't been much rain at all. It's a fairly low rain area for the Highlands. We've got similar rainfall to Kent, so it's not a particularly wet place. And yet it's a couple of feet lower than it should be. In winter this pond will be up to, let me show you, within about 18 inches, 2 feet of the top of that berm. So you can see that it's got quite a bit that it's lost, and yet it hasn't hardly rained at all. And at the deepest part of that, we're probably still looking at a good 6 feet of water. That's a lot of water. Now, the water for the house and the water for the customer is mains water. We've got a water line running up to the top of the field. Water here is fairly inexpensive because it was never privatised in Scotland. It's just tacked onto the council tax. It's very reasonable. I'm very happy to pay it. It's not an issue, but it's pumped water, which means that that's a point of weakness. In the event of a massive grid failure, we could lose our drinking water. That, I mean, currently it's not the best because it needs a lot of life going into it. The plants need to come on and so on, which they take a season or so to do. But eventually that will be pretty clear water, and through basic filtration we could make that perfectly safe drinking water, as well as using it for washing and so on, and we could use it in the garden. It wouldn't last too long if we're using it for irrigating in the garden, but we don't really do much of that anyway. So the next thing on my list is the house. Now, when we moved here, there was nothing else on site except the house and the barn. Now, I'll come to the barn at the end, but the house is an old 1930s breeze block bungalow. It's not a bad little house. It's a perfect size for just the 3 of us that are here now. But it's not the best. There's no windows at all on the south side, which is crazy. So there's no solar gain at all from that angle. But the benefit of that, it does allow me to build along that side without having to worry about interfering with windows from pre-existing construction. So what we're going to do, because the house is on the diagonal with a corner pointing south, so one side faces southwest, one side faces southeast, I'm going to rebuild the garage that was on the southwest side and make another bedroom there. We're going to knock through from, getting ahead of myself, on the southeast side, so the side facing the back garden, I'm going to build a conservatory that's mostly there for growing food, and also as a side benefit, we're going to use it as a big solar accumulator, so that for most of the year, apart from the very darkest time of the winter, we'll be able to use it as for solar gain. So we'll run for most of the year running on passive solar. So between that and the extra room that I'm building onto the end of the building where the garage currently is, which is fallen down basically, I pulled it down for safety because it was about to fall. So we're going to retrofit the house basically, which I'm not going to say we could have built from scratch, but instead I've bought this old house to show what's possible, which you see a lot of people doing. No, that's the house as it is, so I'm making do with it. There's a lot of embodied energy in building that house, so we're certainly not going to rebuild, but it's pretty straightforward to retrofit that for passive solar. Another technology that I'm hoping to be able to put in this year, that's my next big job after I've finished building the toilet block and so on, is I'm going to put in a rocket mass system. Now, the old heating system runs on logs and coal. We're going to swap over to something that uses this. This is the bottom swale. Actually, it's not the bottom swale anymore. Was the bottom swale. It's the willow swale, basically. And the willow grows 3 meters easily every year. Every single year. We're not harvesting it yet. We're going to cut it in the spring. We section it down. We put it in as cuttings to multiply and duplicate the willow we've got. So every year we like quadruple the amount of willow that we've got on this one swale alone. So that in a couple of years from now we should have enough to give us enough stickwood for running the house, because we're going to install a rocket mass system. The entire croft, other than a foot of topsoil, basically floats on clay. There's tons of clay down there and it's very high quality. Occasionally you hit a Seymour stuff that probably you could use for making ceramics. You know, it's really good quality stuff. So we're going to make use of that. We're going to make a lot of cob and we're going to build a mass system, which should keep the house warmer and more comfortable. It's a fairly drafty old house, which doesn't matter so much with a mass system because it uses direct conductive heat and radiant heat. It's going to be a lot more comfortable, as well as which it should use about, it depends on how old your heating is. Ours is very old and very inefficient, so we're probably going to have about a 90% saving. We should use about 1/10 of the fuel that we are currently, which means that in its first winter alone it'll pay for itself, as well as being a lot more comfortable. So those two, I've got other things planned with the house as well, but those are the two biggest technologies that we're going to integrate. That again, the biomass will be grown on the swales, the willow swale, as well as some in the surrounding area. Something just squeaking at me. So that's integrated with the croft and the water harvesting systems, and the conservatory that we'll be using for passive solar gain will also double up as it's going to be a solid slab. It's not going to be like it used to be traditional to put, it was a big permaculture cliche to put a greenhouse on the south side of your house. Well, a greenhouse is a lot of moisture comes out of that ground, and if you've got that going into your house, that's all going to condense inside your house and you're going to have a very damp house. So we're going to, you know, that doesn't really work, especially not in a wettish climate like we've got here. So instead what I'm going to do is have a solid floor instead, and we'll grow in raised wicking beds, which actually use very little water, so we'll have no condensation in the house, but it will allow me to grow all of our tomatoes, all of our chilies, oh, I like chilies, all of that stuff quite happily. So it takes the pressure off growing greenhouses and massively boosts our season extension and contributes a lot to the food production system. So, and as well, of course, the greenhouse itself, the conservatory itself, will be a water collection system. So we'll be able to keep that water on site as well by using that to feed the duck pond and the paddy field and so on. So that's how the house integrates with the rest of the system. We don't have an oven in the house at the moment. I've got a nice, really cleverly designed, not by me, a really cleverly designed biomass system that again will run on the willow that we're growing. But you know, I've got 100 jobs to do and I'm not going to get there yet. It'll take a couple of years and then that will go in. But in summer you won't necessarily want to run that. It's going to get hot, it's going to produce a lot of heat inside the house. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to come up with a biodigester, which will produce biogas, essentially methane, that will swap out a standard propane stove or a standard propane cooker, so that during the summer months we don't have to worry about firing up any of the mass systems and putting more heat in the house than we'd like. We can just run straight from biogas, because in winter we're going to have the mass systems running anyway, so we don't worry about having the excess heat. But so yeah, we don't need the biogas when it isn't going to work. But also in summer when we don't want the heat, we will have gas instead, which will be quick and easy. So those two technologies I think integrate quite well, in that there will be overlap, but one takes over from the other when its output becomes a problem, and vice versa. So I haven't seen those two things combined before, but I'm sure it's happened. They seem to integrate. They just, you know, it's a natural integration, I think. Now the methane is going to come from duck manure. I've got to redesign the duck pond, which already runs about 3-4 different systems, I think, and integrates with everything else. I need to change that design because it only really occurred to me fairly recently this would be a good thing to do. But I'm going to redesign the duck pond so that it's something that I can harvest the duck manure very easily. At the moment it's a bit fiddly. I've got to empty the duck pond. It's pretty straightforward to do then, but I've still got to empty the duck pond to do it. It takes a couple of hours in total. But yeah, if I can just redesign that so I can extract it in a few minutes, it's very easy to just incorporate into the daily routine without it being a massive hassle. It has to be easy, it has to be convenient if it's going to work well. So yeah, that's a plan for a couple of years. So then we're into the food production systems, which is what most people associate with permaculture. The permaculture zoning concept has the things that require the most attention and multiple visits per day closer to where your house is, and the stuff that requires less work further out. So the animal systems, like, where are we? The duck house and the chicken house further on, are pretty much on the edge of zone 1, feeding into zone 2. So, you know, I'm out twice a day, usually checking on the animals at least. So that's nice and easy. Hello! So the ducks are there, which I've already said, are going to provide the manure for the biogas system. That'll be pretty much where the ducks are. It'll be right on the edge of zone 1. And then the chickens are, where are we? Yep, there. That's the chicken house, which is a mobile chicken tractor. Now currently they're being pulsed around this area, which is where we're growing the main crop things. This year it's just potatoes. Next year we'll have, where the potatoes are, we'll grow beans, and the potatoes will be in a different patch until there's 3 main blocks. It's going to take a couple of years to come up to speed. And as part of that, we'll also grow things like sunflowers and so on. That'll be direct feed species for the poultry as well. Downhill side of the poultry is as part of the shelter belt system that we planted all around the Croft. We stopped counting at about 3,000 trees, and there's a lot more than that gone in since. They're mostly quite closely planted. In fact, here we go. Here's one. Where are we? Down here. That's a Siberian pea shrub, Siberian pea tree. Hang on. There we go. And that will be a self-forage species for the chickens. They're doing quite well here. We've got a lot more of them due to go in. But around that we've also got, in fact, let me show you. There's, I think, 6 Siberian peat shrub. So far there's going to be at least 3 or 4 times that number. Hey, look at this. And here we have Morello Cherry. You can see how exposed it is. And yet it's still giving us a pretty good crop of cherries. It's only had in, what, 2 years this tree's been in? No, 1 year. It's a fairly new tree. It grows well in shade, which is why it's down here, because there'll be an overstory of, at the bottom here, it'll be chestnut, and then below that will be hazel, things like cherry, things that, you know, crop quite well in the shade. The chestnut as an overstory. There'll be other trees as well, but, you know, we'll stick with a few. The chestnut will give us an alternative to flour, wheat flour. So in years where the wheat harvest isn't particularly good here, and wheat is expensive, we can use that for baking. Makes very good cakes, makes very good bread. We've played around with chestnut flour in the past, and also hazel gives us a protein source that if you're feeding it to animals, you can just run straight through a coarse crusher, and that gives you an incredibly rich protein and fat source, and the residue then becomes like a woody mulch in the chicken manure. So again, you know, it just improves the land, improves the ground, and massively increases soil carbon. The idea being that it's quite a large area lower down from the chickens, between that and the bottom end of the property. It's quite a big poultry forest, and I think currently we've got about 12, 13 hens. They will be sized, that flock will be sized to cope with, you know, the food forest, which is specifically designed for the poultry. It'll be a poultry forest without eroding it and actually improving it. So, you know, they shouldn't ever get it down to, you know, scratched bare, but they should keep the understory fairly clear, and of course they'll add their manure to it and so on. We also have nitrogen fixing species into it as well, so it should be completely input free, and will give us chickens, eggs, meat, as well as fertility and so on. So you can see there's the duck house behind me, and then behind me here is the paddy field that the duck pond manure water feeds the paddy field, and then feeds a wetland filter, which also provides food, but you know, we'll stick with the main components for the moment. You can see the chicken hut behind me there, which is again a mobile hut, and then this side of that is where the potatoes are this year, and they're growing in a Ruth Stout style mulch bed. We'll see how that does. I anticipate swapping out for wood chip instead of the straw that's there currently, but for this year we'll just use straw because it's what we can get cheap. But all of these systems, so the duck bedding, the chicken bedding, all run or will run wood chip, which again we can produce here on site as biomass. Pretty much behind me here are the raised beds. Now we've got plans for between the greenhouse, which is very close to the house, and the barn. There's a large expanse. Half of that is going to be closed in by a greenhouse. Now that's going to be a summer greenhouse for producing annual veg, but in winter when it's shut down for that, we're going to fill it with wood chip and have the chickens in there, so that'll be their winter quarters. In summer, well late spring, once the chickens come out and they go onto their forage for the winter, they'll have that wood chip combined with the chicken manure will be scraped out, composted down, and that will give the compost to run the annual veg gardens, which are the raised beds behind me here. They're all raised beds. We're a slightly north facing slope. The raised beds have been built so that the surfaces are ever so slightly facing south, slight slope to the south. So instead of having a north facing slope that is you know, difficult to heat up in spring, it's going to be, you know, fairly late in the year. We've got a fairly short season here anyway this far north, so anything that we can do to negate some of that is good. So the raised slightly, the flat raised beds, even on a north slope, completely cancel that out and give us the same season as we would as if we were about 40-50 miles south. Another good reason for having raised beds is the former owner was eccentric. She tended to put bin bags of things just outside and then just leave them. So if you dig anywhere into the back garden or the front garden, if you go down 6 inches, you're hitting plastic, you're hitting rubbish, I found all sorts of interesting things, but there's a lot of plastic in the ground and I don't really want to grow food in that. So it allows us to get up above that level, and over time we're taking it out, but there's a lot of rubbish in there. It allows us to get above that, so we're growing in completely clean soil. The idea with having, the ducks and the chickens so close to zone 1, which is the back garden here where the food is during winter we can occasionally pulse the chickens out, and we've also have a small, in fact you can kind of see it. See the small little chicken tractor that's just behind the bigger eggmobile? That is designed to be the same width as the raised beds. So what we can do, at the moment it's got some pullets in it that we're just bringing on. That'll be coming out of there in a couple of days, and that's designed to be the same width as the raised bed. So we can put that on, we can pull out 4 or 5 chickens and put them in that chicken tractor on the raised beds and move it every couple of hours, and within one day 3 or 4 chickens will do a beautiful tillage job on each of the raised beds, so we never have to come in and till. We're growing more or less no-till anyway. The little bit that we do is just to create that nice seed bed the chickens do for us. Similarly, the ducks, if you just let ducks loose, especially muscovies, they're big. If you just let them loose in your veg garden, they can do a certain amount of damage to your vegetables. You know, they're good foragers. Whereas if we've got raised beds that have got covers over them, we can let them in and we can keep them out of the beds that we don't want them in. So they can come through, they can eradicate the slugs, snails and all of the eggs, but they're leaving the crops that we want left alone. So by design, the chickens provide our tillage for us, and also a certain amount of pest control. They also provide, with wood chip that's grown on site, they provide us with the compost that we need to grow an annual veg in the summer. The ducks feed the rice, and also that water, then I've got a whole video about the rice duck system, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but that duck water also gets used to feed the wetland filter, which also gives us various yields, and also feeds the swale berm, which has got fruit trees, fruit bushes, comfrey, all sorts of stuff growing on it. Proper little strip of food forest, effectively. The excess annual veg then goes to feed the animals, and the food forest beyond feeds the animals, or will in time feed the animal most of their feed in summer, and it should give us enough of a surplus that we can harvest enough in the autumn and store that to keep our animals happy over winter. So with minimal work, we've got a completely closed loop system. Now, you wouldn't do chickens this way if you were talking about doing them for sale. You know, if you had a commercial permaculture farm where you're producing eggs and chicken for sale, it's just not feasible. You'd need so much land for it that, you know, you'd have to charge a fortune for them, and the market wouldn't bear it. But for a system like ours, where effectively we'd have the shelter belt anyway, we've just got it by design, intentionally designed to support poultry, our overheads are nil. It's a bonus on top of having the shelter belt anyway, because we've got a very wide shelter belt around the entire site. I've got videos on that. Because anything inside the land that you lose through having a shelter belt is more than compensated by the increase in yield of the land inside it. So any yield that you get from the shelter belt itself is a bonus. And in our case, it gives us food, it supports our poultry, and gives us shelter, you know, as well as all sorts of, you know, plants for sale and so on, as well as biomass for running some of the mass systems when we have to thin out, and so on. You know, it's everything works together, everything's integrated. So, a quick overview of the system as it's designed. We've got the animals doing the work for us, and we've got species designed to support the animals. So in the event of there being a disruption to food, any sort of supply chain, we haven't got to panic, the animals are still going to get fed. I've got designs for all sorts of other little bits and pieces. This is just an overview of the main general systems. So for example, we've got shell grit. Of course, chickens need shell grit. We can't grow that on the site, but we go to the beach regularly foraging other things as well, so that's not such an issue for us. And I've got a wind-powered system designed for pulverizing shell down into something that's actually usable, so I'm not there smashing it with a hammer. You know, it'll all get done very passively, very easily, but that's going to have to wait, maybe next year. So the idea being that all of our needs are met by the site itself. So the shelter belt system and the swales with the trees on provide us with a huge amount of food. They provide food for the animals, a lot of fodder for them. They provide us with shelter. We've got a lot of nitrogen fixing species, so they provide us with all the fertilization that the trees need themselves to grow. Those that we require a really good yield from, like the willow that we're coppicing every year, will be given they'll be given feed from the very systems that at least at the top of the site, they'll be given feed from the very systems that they provide input for. So, you know, the humanure systems. But out here in the shelter belt systems, you can see behind me, where are we? These trees here, these are Italian alder. They're currently putting on about a foot, 18 inches a year. They're flying up. I'm really impressed with them. Of all the species we're playing with, they're probably one of the more reliable. Fantastic. If we can, we're probably going to try and put some more in this winter. And you can see this was put in as a knee-high sapling 2 years ago, and now it's as tall as me. And some of the ones further up have got a foot on me. They're quite big. So the shelter gives us a huge amount of yield, and really all of that's a bonus. Everything on the inside of the system, and that's still a lot of land, it's 5 acres, gives us more than we need. So as well as the customer side of things with the camping pods, we also have trees for sale, cuttings for sale, we have animals for sale, and of course with having customers regularly on site. It gives us an outlet for, you know, surplus eggs, surplus vegetables, surplus fruit, and so on. We've got water harvesting earthworks that also double up as a drainage system when necessary. I'm putting in a new swale sometime in the next couple of weeks. We're doing it by hand. We're not using machinery. You don't really need machinery to put in swales. It's quicker and easier if you've got it here, but it's not worth bringing anyone just for that. And in that video, I'm going to show how I design swales to be adjustable, so you can set them differently for summer and winter, so that in summer you can have them set to fully infiltrate all the water when it's scarce, but in winter, when you've got too much of it, once the ground's saturated, we can set it at whatever level we want, so that we can actually drain that water away from the site, so that we're not getting waterlogged. It's just another level of resiliency. So we've got ponds. We've got one or two reasonable sized ones, at least by our standards, and a couple of smaller ones. They're designed, as well as being really important for biodiversity. I mean, the amphibian life on the Croft has exploded. We see frogs all over the place. We see newts in summer. You know, just massively important. They also hold on water, and because they're unlined ponds, they're just into the natural native clay. They seep constantly, so they're constantly seeping that water into the system. And once the trees are big enough, that's the level at which the trees will be drawing their moisture from. So they'll be providing evaporative cooling in the hottest time of the year. They'll be providing shelter so that we lose less water to the wind. Overall, the water demands of the Croft should start to go down significantly at that point, and they're already pretty modest. So yeah, that's the water harvesting systems that also double up as a drainage system. So, future plans. I've already mentioned that I want to phase out the propane gas boiler. Currently, it's the best solution for the customer shower unit. If we could go straight to biomass now, you know, and use wood logs instead of stuff that we've grown on site. The trouble with logs this far north is they're bought in as green wood, so they're imported as green logs, and then using fossil fuel, they are just still a bit. Using fossil fuel, they are kiln dried here in the far north. There's a massive environmental impact. It's probably easier to just heat directly with propane at this point. I might give that a little bit of wriggle room. Once we're close to having enough biomass to supply that, I might do it anyway, on the grounds that it's only going to need supporting by off-site biomass very occasionally, you know, for the first year or so. So that's one thing that we want to change. Another thing I want to do is bring in geese. Now, that was meant to happen this year. We've got a lot of gap between the three swale systems, which are, where are we? There's three main swales between me and where the pods are. I want to put geese in there for grazing. Now, a geese, it doesn't give you milk, but other than that, behaves very much like a very small cow. A little bit grumpier than a cow, but still. The idea being that by grazing, and of course manuring afterwards, they'll rotate the pasture through themselves and convert basically grass into meat, eggs, and actually improve the pasture significantly. We're going to do it on a rotational grazing model, so they're not just kept on the same land, which means that we should be able to keep quite a flock. We're going to go for Toulouse geese. First off, they're quite close to the customers, and if you've got a lot of geese, that's a lot of noise. So Toulouse are fairly quiet, as well as they're not the fastest growing, but they are they're a very valuable bird. You know, they fetch very good money, and their eggs fetch very good money as well, viable eggs. But we'll come to that in a minute. I've got other plans with the geese. But the other plan is this building behind me. This is a very old barn. This is the original Cairn Of Dunn Croft, before the other house was built in the 1930s. It's an amazing building. Let me show you this. The roof isn't too clever. I've got to be careful working underneath it. It needs a new roof. But you can see here the thickness of the walls. Now that is a good, let me show you, it's a good 2.5 foot thick. Now the outer skin you can see here has been rendered with concrete, and the same thing's happened on the inside, but between the two it's just cob, it's just clay. So I'm assuming that originally it might not have even been rendered. So very, very cool. So we're going to keep that as much as possible. The barn currently has about 3 foot of manure in it, which you can see through the doorway there. That's a lot of work. I've made a start, but it's going to take months. But yay, manure mine, you know, you can't have too much fertility. So I'm going to use that to push up the willow and really accelerate the system. I've been very busy setting up the pod business this year, but next year we should have a bit more downtime and I'll be able to get onto jobs like this. And this is a very big building. This end of it has actually got its second floor still intact. It's been lost in that side, but you can still see where it would have originally been. And the plan for this building is to make it habitable again. Pretty much give it the same treatment as we give in the house. So it'll have a greenhouse on this side, and directly opposite it, in that direction, is exactly where the sun comes up in the morning. So first thing in the morning, even in winter, by about 9 in the morning, that's going to get a lot of direct sun. It's going to warm the building up significantly. I'm going to try and, I've got various plans for it, but that building is a huge amount of mass. So if we can just get enough heat into it when the sun is out, that building should run mostly off grid. So with a few rocket mass systems installed into it, especially with a big greenhouse on the side of it, which will hugely increase our food capacity. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting building, and it's a good enough size. So the idea being, it gives us a multifunctional space. Part of it is going to be workshops, because I'm having to make do with a very small shed at the minute. I want to have a decent workshop or two. But the other side of it gives us a capacity for doing everything from running permaculture courses to letting other people come in and run yoga residentials, to wedding receptions, all sorts. You know, imagine a couple of decent sized teepees out between the swales on the pastures, you know, with everything cranking in summer. Be a lovely place for a wedding venue, you know, for the permaculturally inclined. So that's our plan for that, and again we'll massively increase the resiliency and we'll integrate with everything else. The entire building will run from solar and the biomass that's grown entirely on site, as well as giving us loads of yields and giving us water off the roof and so on. The other side of that, where I said I'm going to put the greenhouse for the you know, the winter quarters for the chickens. It gets some sun, enough to keep the chickens happy, but probably not enough to grow in, because it's a little bit in the shade of this building for a large proportion of the day in winter when the sun's so low. But if I close in the gaps then between that greenhouse and the existing greenhouses against the shed near the house and this building with fences, that gives, you know, solid fences and walls, that gives me a nice solid slab across there. And if I put another set of structures, which, you know, I'll spare you the details of all this, you get the idea, between this structure and the house, that gives us effectively a walled garden behind where all the zone 1 plantings are, where you can see just about make out the raised beds in there. See, there's the brassica bed. So yeah, a lot of plans, but that means the buildings and the structures themselves provide shelter for stuff inside it, as well as providing water capturing and so on. Beyond a certain point, of course, it's just going to make sense to take the entire grid off site, entire site off grid. By the time that we don't need it for, I've got other plans for the cooling side of things, but in terms of heating, we've got no pumps to run, all the hot water, cooking, heating, all those things are provided by on-site resources. Really, the money that we're going to be putting into just the monthly charge is going to be, you know, too much. It's just not going to be, it's not going to be efficient to keep running on mains power. At that point, it'll be cheaper to just put in a few solar panels and a small battery system after we've greatly reduced our need for electricity, and yeah, it'll be worthwhile doing that, which is a very long-term plan. So all of these systems and all of these structures all combined pretty much will make us a very, very resilient system. So we've got a willow fedge that runs up alongside the track. I've done a video on that again, I'll put a link to that down below. That, for example, in a good year, when everything's fine and everything's functioning well and the supply chain's working well, The simplest thing to do would be to cut that in spring, section them down and sell them as cuttings. They go for good money. I mean, we spent quite a bit of money on the cuttings just to do that one length. We've got the same thing with a willow dome that we got right at the top of the site as well. Well, willow dome's a bold statement, they're only waist high so far, but you know, a couple of years from now they'll be good. Those cuttings could be used for that, but in a system where the postal system isn't working too well, or you know, we've got a lockdown for whatever reason. You know, we've all had a big lesson along that this year, haven't we? We could just use that directly as fuel. Now, it'll be very expensive fuel, but if you can't sell it and it saves you buying logs in, you know, that becomes an option. Similarly, the geese. Now, Toulouse geese fetch very good money as geese, so we can breed them and sell them, which is how you get the maximum money. We can do fertile eggs, again, a nice earner if you've got the space for them, which, you know, we do. It's masses. But also, if the food isn't coming into the shops, rather than having to drive into town and buy a frozen chicken, that's a lot of meat. You know, we could actually eat them as well. So it's got that with that system, and the same goes for the chickens and the muscovy ducks. As system function, they're very, very productive, and we can keep them. But if we needed to, if food was scarce coming into the shops, if there was a break in that supply chain, we could bring on a batch of chickens, we could bring on a batch of ducklings, and either sell them as meat birds or process them ourselves for meat birds. It all means that we've got multi-functional, multi-layered yields that we can get from a system. So it's not just this one thing gives us this, and that's all there is to it. That's, you know, that's a fixed thing. No, it's adjustable, and we can change the yields that we're getting from that system based on what we've got and what the state of the world is at that time. There's a huge amount of resiliency. It means that the system, once it's going properly, if food isn't coming into the shops, then food isn't also coming into the agricultural merchants. So if we can provide, even if it does take a bit more work, if we can provide our animals and ourselves with 90% of what they need from the croft, that gives us a huge amount of resiliency. And that lets me sleep at night very well. And all of this is on the same land base as a fairly, so it's 5 acres. To me, that's a huge amount of land, because it is. But by most crop standards, and by most farm standards, it's fairly small. It's not that huge. There's a very famous book, a very well-regarded book. I've got 2 copies of it in different editions. John Seymour book on smallholding. The name escapes me, I'll write it at the bottom. And according to that book, on 5 acres you can have X number of pigs, you can have X number of sheep, you can have X amount of poultry, you know, all listed. And the basis being that it's going to give you, even though you've got to buy feed for them all, it'll give you so much food as of a higher quality than anything you can buy. It's worth doing. And that's true, but that's only as long as the world is working in a perfect way. And as we've learned, the world isn't working perfectly at the moment, and isn't likely to for quite some time. Crops are going to continue to do badly intermittently because of massive shifts in the climate. It's very unstable. Economically, things aren't looking too great currently either, so it's a very unstable, very unreliable supply chain currently, and that's going to carry on for quite some time. So rather than having a fixed idea of, for example, but I like eating bacon and I like eating bread, therefore I want to have pigs and I want to have wheat. Well, another way of looking at it is I like to eat grain and I like to eat meat. Well, look at it in that way, and you know, if you're hungry, you're going to say, actually I'm not that keen on goose, I'm holding out for bacon. Now, if you haven't eaten in 2 days, you're going to eat what you've got. It makes a very, very resilient system if you just look at it in terms of supplying your needs through the yields that the land can provide without a huge amount of input. You just got to give up on this fixed idea of I want to have X, Y, Z in terms of species. So yeah, that's our system. It's regenerative. None of it is damaging the land or eroding it or causing damage. As far as I can tell, within 5 years, the only thing that we should always need to bring onto site is toilet paper. I'm okay with buying toilet paper for customers, that's not a problem. We've pretty much ruled it out in the house. We've got other systems in place to deal with personal cleanliness. And really, with minimal hassle, we could even rule it out at the top of the site. And if there's no toilet paper coming into the shops and we still got customers coming to site, we can say, bring your own toilet paper, because the entire country is going to be in the same position. I'm not going to worry about it. So, yeah. As well as, of course, there's huge financial benefit to it. You know, if you haven't got to buy all the inputs that your business requires, or your house requires, or your lifestyle or your garden requires, as well as making your things more resilient, it also makes it far cheaper and far more efficient. So yeah, it's a pretty reasonable, that's a pretty good reason to look into permaculture design, in my opinion.